I experienced this nearly 8 years ago, and I've been thinking about it ever since. At the time, I was in my early 20s and camping in the upper Idaho wilderness. I went on long hikes quite a bit and knew the fundamentals of camping, but I wouldn't say I was an expert just yet. Additionally, there were many animals in that area, such as grizzly and black bears. Many casual hikers and campers were discouraged by the necessity of being prepared. There aren't many people living up there either, and the only people you'd encounter hiking a trail are tourists. In Upper Idaho, most campgrounds are not very crowded. Nevertheless, even though it was obviously unneeded, I made an effort to avoid those tourist attractions and stick to less well-traveled paths. I had selected one for this trip that was just beyond the large, well-known mountain range. This trail just followed the slopes that bordered the mountain and passed through the forest, arriving at a pleasant open location where the mountain range can be seen. The closest route I could find was 3 miles distant and led to a tiny lake, which I decided to avoid because I thought there could be a few other people there. However, I was correct. No one else was there the entire time I hiked there. The campground was open and deserted when I arrived, and the route appeared to be essentially unutilized. On the far side, I pitched my tent and located some large stones to use for a fire pit. Since I only had 2 or 3 hours of daylight left, I didn't have any plans to accomplish much else that day. Simply relax at the campsite and consider my plans for the next day. I made a fire and toasted some marshmallows as the sun went down so I could watch the stars. With only a faint breeze and the occasional animal cry, the entire valley was extremely silent. The silence, however, was broken by something. A recurring crunch of leaves emanating from the forest. After a moment, it was fairly clear that someone was moving. I was kind of astonished and perplexed as to why someone was out there, and all I could do was sit there and stare in that direction until they were at the border of my campsite. It was a man, but I couldn't tell much about them because of the flickering campfire shadows. They appeared to be wearing a standard camping backpack. That was that. After glancing at me and then the whole of my campground, they apologized before I could respond, then turned around and left in the exact same direction I had heard them arrive. They also seemed to be attempting to be quiet as they apologized. The sound was no more than a whisper. It was so odd. Which ones were they even sorry for? They were probably searching for a place to camp. They couldn't have been wandering around at night like that. I suppose it was a very unnerving feeling. Although their behavior was just unusual for any hiker I had ever encountered, I didn't feel in danger. Their footsteps left, disappearing into the soft, silent night that had been there only seconds before, as though nothing had took place. Only a few minutes later, I was back to stargazing and unwinding despite the strange interruption. I hoped that guy would arrive quickly wherever he was going. And secure. I didn't give it much more thought, though, save for that. A few hours passed, or seemed to have passed. The moon and stars were obscured by the rolling clouds. It threw a shadow across the whole forest. Since I wasn't quite ready to go to sleep, I sat by the campfire and hoped that I would finally grow bored and drowsy enough to end the evening. However, I suddenly heard footsteps once again. This time, they moved more quickly, almost like frantic footsteps rushing through the woods in the same spot that the man had come from earlier in the evening. I got up and became anxious as they got closer. Then the light came on him. The backpack and his whole appearance told me that this hiker was the same one I had seen previously. I could see him better this time since he walked higher. In addition to his oily black hair and medium scruffy beard, he had dirt scuffed across his face and some traces of discomfort on his clothing. And he appeared afraid, as seen by his wide eyes. But he had a cold, soulless lips. "Are things going well? You should have arrived at your campsite by now, most likely. It is quite late." The man stood, taking a deep breath, but he was alert. I responded, "Are you lost? Maybe I can help," as his gaze briefly shifted over my right shoulder before returning to me. After that, he murmured under his breath that he didn't mean to disturb me and that he was simply trekking in the woods. However, his eyes were constantly moving to something on my right side as he spoke slowly. Only a moment would he search. Then his gaze would return to me. "Well, pay attention, you are quite anxious. I'm able to assist. Perhaps transmit a radio message for you or for whatever reason you require." After seemingly ignoring what I said, he abruptly fixed me with his gaze once more. More attentively than previously. "Right now, you're camping here. For what reason?" His questioning style was somewhat unnerving. Once more, his gaze strayed to my right, and I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder. Dark, empty forests. Nothing caught my eye. Now that I was starting to feel really uneasy, I wasn't sure how much longer I wanted to speak with this man, let alone try to assist him with whatever was happening. Then he made a creepier question. "Are you the only one here? Do you have any company? Where are the others?" The question surprised me, and I was hesitant to answer at first. And he said something else before I could respond. "Have you been watching me?" There was something wrong. He began to tense up and his demeanor changed. I replied that I didn't understand what he was talking about. Then again, his gaze moved to something over my shoulder. They didn't shift back to me, though, this time. His hollow, wide eyes were fixed on something. One final inquiry he posed. "So why do you have her with you?" Upon turning around, I peered over my right shoulder, but I saw nothing. Still just dark, deserted woods. I turned around to face the man. He was still staring past me when his face turned horrified, and then he started running, sprinting more into the forest. In a matter of seconds, he was gone, past all the lights. He ran in a direction that was completely unrelated to the trail. My own. But the heart continued to race. Trying to understand what the devil that guy was talking about and what he was seeing, I was scanning my surroundings, paying particular attention to the area behind me. I believed I had made the connection in the few seconds that followed his question, "Then why are you with her?" that a woman or gang was pursuing this man in the woods. It was my complete expectation that she would be standing behind me when I glanced over my shoulder. Horrifying and insane. I was unsure of what to believe now, though. However, I was so terrified that I was determined not to stay any longer. After gathering everything, I got going. The entire trek made me tense, even though I could see the guy racing away from the route. Every little sound shocked me, and I thought maybe a woman was following me, or whomever the hell he was. Discussing, but I didn't. After reaching my car, I departed. After giving it some more thought, I decided to leave a message about the man outside with the local police station the next morning because I was rather concerned about him. Although I haven't been able to pinpoint exactly what happened that night, I have consulted dozens of people over the years, so I can offer a reasonable perspective. The most likely there is a tragic explanation. The man may have become lost and been out there for a long time, likely becoming so hungry and dehydrated that he nearly went insane and became paranoid, believing that someone or something was following him through the woods at night. He didn't recognize aid when he saw it, unfortunately, because he wasn't in the proper frame of mind. He was probably too paranoid when he discovered me to realize that I could have saved him by providing him with food and water and allowing him to leave the woods. He might have been so engrossed in the paranoia of whatever he believed to be following him that he failed to realize he was lost. There is no way to know if this is true, even though it is the most likely explanation for the man's actions and the events of that evening. He might not have trusted me because he was actually being followed and wasn't sure whether I was just another stalker in the group. He was freaking me out if that were the case. I think Knight saved my life from the other people out there. But we're probably never going to know for sure. The man appears to have never left the woods, as he was never seen or located again. Music, Story 2, by Anonymous. I was at home tonight, intending to stay up late to do some work papers that I had to finish. Due to a few other factors, I put these off for a little too long. I was forced to stay up and finish it tonight because of the upcoming events. I made myself a cup of coffee, went upstairs to my office, and shut myself in to work through the night and block out any outside distractions. As I drank my coffee and locked in, I performed quite well for a few hours. But when my energy and coffee ran out, I could feel myself beginning to wane. Perhaps I should walk downstairs and stretch my legs for a minute to make. I'd want another cup to help me reset. I rose and made my way to the kitchen. However, as the coffee boiled, I noticed that I was much colder than the rest of the house, as though a chilly breeze was coming through the downstairs. When I checked the thermostat, I found that although the heat was on, it was turned down by a few degrees. Upon conducting some research, I discovered that a window at the rear of the living room was open. I opened my downstairs windows quite a bit during the day, but I had never, as far as I knew, neglected to close them. Not only that, but unlike the ones I typically did, this one was completely open. I was understandably a little spooked when I walked up to it and took a quick look at it. It began to creep into my head that someone had opened it and entered. But I didn't see any more evidence to support that. I poked my head outside. He examined the area beneath the window, finding no signs of disturbance or tracks in the dirt. Additionally, there was nothing on the window that I would anticipate seeing from someone scuttling in. Your mind always wants to believe that you're overanalyzing the situation and that you would never actually experience something like this. I began to believe that today I simply opened the window a little more than normal and neglected to shut it. Lacking any more indications to guess it otherwise, I went back upstairs, got my fresh cup of coffee, and closed the window. Now, over the following half hour, I continued to have some rambling thoughts and wasn't entirely content with the conclusion I reached. Therefore, I hurriedly got up and glanced around the house to make sure I was alone. I returned to my work after finding nothing. Another hour passed. I was in. Despite my mental exhaustion from trying to finish this, I was immediately awakened by a loud thump behind me. It sounded like it was right behind my desk, but there was nothing there. I assumed it must be something from inside my bedroom, which was directly across the wall. But it was impossible to ignore the sound. Additionally, I found it difficult to resist imagining the worst this time around because of the window incident from earlier. However, I sprang up, went into the hallway, and the door of the bedroom was opened. From the hallway, I glanced at the room before entering carefully. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary from the entryway. Such a powerful sound should be immediately recognizable, like heaven descending on the earth, but it wasn't. I looked around the rest of the bedroom and saw nothing strange, and the floor was free of anything. Pulling an all-nighter was really driving me insane, and I was beginning to think that. It was quite difficult to concentrate for the following 15 minutes after I returned to the workplace. There was a thump behind me, and I knew it. The noise level was really high. Could it simply be nothing? After 15 minutes, my concentration finally wavered, and I whirled in my chair to look behind me at the source of the sound. I felt foolish all of a sudden when I considered it while looking at the wall. A closet was present, correct? Over there. I only kept winter jackets and old clothing in that tiny, slender closet. I didn't even realize it existed. Inquisitive, but not really expecting to find anything, I stood up and walked to it, slackly opening the door. My lungs were empty of breath. A wave of terror that paralyzed my body. I was in with a stranger in person. He was behind all the jackets in the back of the closet, inches from me. Before I could even escape, he probably could have reached out and grabbed me if it weren't for the thin layer of clothing separating us. I could hear the closet tearing apart as the unidentified man pushed his way out to come after me. The moment the man screamed my name as I scurried down the corridor, I felt a chill go through me. I didn't recognize his voice, though. He spoke my name in a rough, unsettling manner, as though he knew who I was. It seems like the man tried harder to persuade me to stop running than he did to chase me, so I managed to leave the house. I eventually arrived at a neighbor's house around the block and knocked on their door repeatedly until they responded and phoned the police on my behalf. By the time they searched the house, the man had left. There weren't even any indications of where he fled to, and that's essentially where it's been since. My office closet was reached by a spooky, unidentified man who climbed via one of my downstairs windows in the middle of the night. I think this happened as I was leaving to inspect the house after discovering the window. That implies the man was immediately behind me, watching me work at my desk for probably more than an hour. He knew my identity, which is even worse, because it was unquestionably a prearranged break-in by a possible stalker. Therefore, it's difficult to predict whether he will return. If I hadn't gone to bed that night and pulled an all-nighter, I would not be here today. Story number 3, written by H.C. It was just 1 month ago. The weekend was upon us. Normally, I would sit home and do nothing, but this Saturday was different. My closest friend was having a birthday celebration. I had to leave, sort of. Simply our close friends were to attend. It was simply intended to be a small gathering where they could enjoy a few drinks and chat for a few hours. My apartment was about 10 minutes drive from my friend's place. And I took a car over there at 6:30. It was not a particularly noteworthy gathering. It wasn't actually a party, I suppose, simply a get-together. But in the end, we did have a little drink while conversing. Eventually, at around 1 a.m. most folks had either made the decision to stay overnight or had left. I truly didn't enjoy sleeping in a bed anywhere else than at home. However, I was still a little inebriated and didn't want to take the chance of driving. Perhaps, against my better judgment, I chose to simply leave to my dwelling. I was advised by my pals to leave my automobile parked in their driveway. I had also made the walk many times previously. It took only 25 to 30 minutes, and much of that time was spent in the peaceful suburbs. After bidding farewell to the remaining friends who were present, I started to go home. The hike got off to a good start in the calm weather. The one that the whole area was quiet and motionless. No one was outdoors, no cars were moving, and none of the houses had lights on. By now, everyone was most likely asleep. Suddenly, a pair of headlights came down the road as I was walking. They weren't very intelligent, and they moved slowly until they approached my location and rolled to a stop. I couldn't really see them because they hadn't rolled down their window all the way and it was dark. The voice of a man reached out to see if I was all right or if I needed a ride. They drove away without saying anything more after I thanked him and assured him that I was okay. It didn't occur to me. He seemed to really want to know how I was doing based on the tone of his speech. I continued to stroll down the same path. The neighborhood was still as silent as before, and another few minutes passed. However, a road sign in front of from behind me reflected a light. When I turned back, I saw the identical vehicle approaching from the opposite direction of how he had previously come down the road. But instead of going by me, he ended up parking and pulling off to the side of the road. The fact that he turned around and returned this way, only to stop and park as soon as he was in sight of me, still seemed odd to me. Appeared to be a significant coincidence. I continued to go while periodically looking over my shoulder, but the man never departed from his vehicle and ultimately vanished from view. In the hopes that this wouldn't be a problem, I made it to the next neighborhood segment. Naturally, though, the fact that you were walking by yourself in the middle of the night added to the sense of suspicion. But every minute that went by, I began to feel happier. By this time, I was barely 10 minutes from my apartment when I abruptly saw a car parked in front of me. The vehicle was parked on the street, but not on the curb or the side of the road, with its headlights on. The road was exactly in the center of it. I could see more details as I drew nearer, and I could tell it was unquestionably the same vehicle. Knowing that there was less and less likelihood that this was merely a coincidence made me feel a knot in my throat. I could actually only take 2 different paths to get to my apartment from where I was. Normally, I simply strolled down this street. Since I knew there was a park up ahead with a walking trail slicing through the trees, but it would take me the most of the way there. I didn't often utilize it because it was usually safer to stay on the street on this walk because it was usually at night and the path through the woods had no lights or anything. I reasoned that in this particular situation, it could be safer to go into the woods rather than past the car, which was obviously observing me too closely. Nevertheless, the automobile was parked oddly near to the trail entry, as if they were just a short distance ahead of it. As I approached the location, I recognized to be the trail entrance. It almost seemed too ideal, but I needed to get to the walkway before I could pass the automobile. The closer I came, the more I stared out into the trees, the more anxious I became. I had to trust my intuition. I continued to go in the direction of the car, past the woodland entrance. I grasped my eye past it, breathing, but nothing came of it. I noticed that there was no one inside the car as I reached the front and glanced back through the windshield. This vehicle, which had been following me and was parked with its headlights on in the middle of the road, was deserted. After giving it some thought, I turned to face the woods farther back. Barely visible through the darkness, I saw a man's form standing behind the trees, observing me. I did not take any further opportunities. Just a few seconds after I started running, I heard the man get into his vehicle. Fortunately, the fact that I took out my phone while running must have put a stop to him since he turned around and walked away. My running continued until I reached my house. I later reported what appeared to be a kidnapping attempt to the police. The coincidences were simply too great to be true. It's frightening to consider that I would have been a perfect victim of that man's trap, where he was waiting for me to do just that, had I not followed my instincts and made the apparent decision to cut through the woods. I would have had no way out if I had been out in the woods with him at night. Just a month has passed, and nothing more than a description of his vehicle and his voice. It is unlikely that they will ever locate or persuade anyone.